This episode of Scandal Water contains adult themes and descriptions of violence. It is not intended for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Scandal Water, where the tea is hot and the conversation lively.
Your hosts, Candy
And Ashley,
will discuss a peculiar story somehow related to the entertainment industry. This podcast might not change the world, but it just might satisfy your thirst for an intriguing tale.
Oh, it's that time of day. Tune in and hear what the ladies say. It's time to bend your ear when the silver screen appears. Stories about the stage and screen and everything in between. So come on and join the fun. The curtain opens in 3, 2, 1.
Morning, Ashley.
good morning.
I have an interesting question for you.
Well, let's have it.
So as you guys know, our theme this month is in our own backyard. So we have been talking about a lot of true crime incidents that have occurred in and around Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would like to ask you, Ashley, you have lived in Kentucky your entire life.
Yes.
Have you ever, upon meeting somebody new perhaps and telling them you're from Kentucky,
Yeah.
encountered jokes or stereotypes
Oh,
related to
like
our state?
You mean you wear shoes?
Exactly.
I don't know. I'm sure I have, but I have not kept them in my mind because they did not matter to me.
Okay.
You know, I don't think so.
I did live in Indiana for about a decade, from 9 to maybe 18 or 19.
Mm-hmm.
But the rest of the time I was a Kentuckian. And I will say I have had the jokes about the shoes.
Mm-hmm.
I have
Or
had...
your cousin, did you marry your cousin?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The kissing cousins
Yeah.
references. And I'm not sure if this is because of that or if it's just me, but I do recall being shocked as a freshman at Western Kentucky when my very sweet, kind drama professor commented that I really should work on my country accent.
Oh.
I was like,
Now,
I didn't think I had one.
I do know that I did have a country accent, and it does come out depending on who you're with. If you're with
Yes.
your people,
Yes.
it does tend to come out. But I can really slide into it if I wanted to. Now it wasn't this bad.
You can lean into it if
I
you
can
want
lean
to.
into it. Yep.
Well, I ask all this because the topic that I've chosen this week, it is actually a surprise to
It
you. That's
is.
very rare nowadays that we surprise you, but this one is a surprise to you. I did not choose it because it had anything to do with the stereotypes or the impressions people have of Kentuckians. But upon starting my research, was shocked to discover that it does relate to that in some way. I'm going to let you hear this little clip, which is going to reveal both the topic and you'll also see the connection to the little question we just discussed.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
I first learned about the Hatfield and McCoy feud from Bugs Bunny.
That there rabbit critter's bound to be around here somewheres. On account of I sees his footy print.
When I was a little kid, I saw a Bugs Bunny cartoon in which there were these two feuding mountaineer families.
Get him, Pumpkinhead!
The Hatfield and McCoy feud really created the stereotype of the hillbilly in the American popular consciousness. And it was this image of a simple-minded, violent, backward people.
There's a stereotype that these were toothless moonshine and hillbillies taking pot shots at one another. But it couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah.
The Hatfield-McCoy feud is perhaps the most famous family conflict in American history.
Didn't
It
they
has
say it
become
started
a
over a
mythical
pig?
tale of
We're
jealousy,
going to talk about all that.
rage, and revenge. Yet the events that took place near the end of the 19th century in central Appalachia are part of a much richer and more complex story. A story of a people's way of life slipping away and their struggle to adapt to forces far beyond their control.
Ooh, I got goosebumps. I'm excited about this one.
That was amazing to me.
Yeah.
I found this PBS documentary. It's Our American Experience called
Yeah.
The Feud. And honestly, I don't know if they took down some of the parts. I could only find certain episodes of
Okay.
it, even though I hunted it down. But the parts I found were very good. That was an excerpt from the first piece, chapter 1 of The Feud. And I loved several things about it. First of all, the fact that they called out, this is where the stereotype
Yeah.
originates
Yeah.
and how untrue it is.
Yeah.
And then the fact that there were so many other factors at play. We're going to get into all
I'm
that.
excited.
I was so excited doing this. I knew you would also love the part about the cartoon.
Bugs Bunny,
Yes,
yes.
introducing people to that story. How did you first, as far as you can remember, come across that story of the Hatfield and McCoys?
It might have been through Bugs Bunny because I really do not know where I first heard of it. I've just always known about it.
Right.
But I've not known really what it was about other than that's the term you use. Like Romeo and Juliet is what you use for star-crossed lovers.
Right.
Hatfield and McCoys is what you use for families that are feuding.
Absolutely. It goes on to say across this documentary and others that Hollywood loved their story. You may not remember because it was in so many different things. Abbott and Costello did a little takeoff on it. The Family Feud game show supposedly was inspired by it.
Really?
Yes. I mean, it comes up over and over again. I found a different cartoon that was from 1938, Merry Melodies,
Yes.
that was based on it.
Huh.
So this feud has been in our national consciousness
For a long
for
time.
a long time, and people have heard of it and probably, like us, aren't even sure how
How
or
they
when we
heard about
first
it.
heard about it. And we also are so uncertain of the actual details, or at least I was, because I was surprised when I was
I am too.
researching this. So what are the details that you think you recall beyond, you mentioned a pig incident?
That's about it.
Okay.
Really, I like when the cartoon was playing, I don't know if people heard me, I was commenting, wasn't this over a pig? And that's, I mean, I'm sure I've heard about it at some point in my life, but again, I just kind of filed it away and didn't pay much attention to it. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
don't
Okay. Well, I will say it was a little difficult, as it always is, to pin down the
truth.
the exact truth. Yes, because as always, I came across conflicting information. I ended up using multiple sources, of course, but two that I'm going to call out that I relied on quite a bit were that same PBS American Experience documentary that I've already mentioned. It has some great stuff. And I also actually came across the Hatfield and McCoy Foundation website.
Oh.
They are doing this together, and I figure if these two families have come together and said this is
Anything
the
is
truth,
possible.
well, and they've also said here's the story the way
we know
we
it.
believe it. I'm going to take it as credible.
Yeah.
So I want to give a shout out up front to those two particular sources, even though obviously we're using a lot of others as well. We're going to start first with a little context. Again, this is all so foreign to me. I knew none of this. But at the point that their feud started, both the Hatfields and McCoys lived along the Tug Fork of the Big Sandy River, which is this little area that snakes along the boundary between Kentucky and West Virginia.
Okay.
Okay. Now, for a while it said they were neighbors, but at some point, most of the McCoys moved to the Kentucky side, which would be in Pike County, Kentucky, and the Hatfields remained over on, well, originally it was Virginia, but then when they split it and it became West Virginia, then it was West Virginia, specifically in Logan County. Okay. So that's where they're located. That's where all this has taken place. And again, during most of the time that the feud was going on, there were two well-known patriarchs. William Anderson Hatfield was the head of the Hatfield clan. People called him Devil Ants. That was his nickname from the time he was young.
When you're a little kid and they're calling you the devil, that's a rough dude.
Well, he had a reputation for being fierce and fearless, but he was also highly respected,
Well, yeah.
very shrewd, very smart.
Rough as a corn cob, right?
Yeah.
Corn cob.
Yeah. He had this appearance of being this grizzled kind of mountain man, but he was actually a very smart, astute businessman as well. He was pretty wealthy. He started a timber business, a logging business, and he employed a lot of people working for him, including some McCoys.
Okay.
And if you saw the 2012 miniseries on the Hatfield and McCoys, Kevin Costner was the
Yeah.
one who played Devil Ants.
Okay.
Okay.
I have heard of that, but I did not see it.
I watched it.
Was it good?
I thought it was good. Now, I mean, I will tell you that
I didn't know that was all the way in 2012.
it was,
Wow.
yes. People will say that there are some inaccuracies in that as well. I thought it was fascinating. I thought it was well done and well acted. I really enjoyed it. But again, you know, reportedly there are a few things that are not quite right.
I wonder if this is what got him in the mood to do Yellowstone. You know, he's like, I like playing these kind of grizzled characters.
Yeah, he did a really good job, I will say. Well, the head of the McCoy clan was Randolph McCoy, who people called Randall or Old Randall or Randall.
Okay.
I'm going to call him Randall.
Okay. You're not going to go with old Randall?
I'm not going to live in old Randall territory.
Old Randall.
Yeah, but the Hatfield and McCoy Foundation website pointed out, quote, though not as prosperous as Devil Ants, Randolph owned some land and livestock. So he was doing okay, but he was nowhere near the same level of wealth and prosperity as the Hatfields. But something that came up across several sources was this idea that there probably was some envy going on between the McCoys and the Hatfields because of the fact that
they weren't as well off.
Right,
All right.
exactly. So there might have been some envy there, but they were doing okay. And also, I'll come back to this again. This is a small town. This is a small community. I think Little House on the Prairie, which we just recently covered, you had people living together happily. You had people who were friendly, who were intermarrying, including the Hatfields and McCoys.
Okay, so there was some intermarriage.
There were intermarriage. You had McCoys working for Devil Ance's business. I mean, they were happily interacting in this small community.
In the
at this
before
time.
times.
In the before, yes.
Okay.
If you've seen, again, that same 2012 miniseries, Bill Paxton played Randall.
Oh.
Now, there was an inaccuracy, though, because in all actuality, Randolph McCoy was, I can't remember now, 10 or 12 years older than Devil Ance, but Bill Paxton is younger than Kevin Costner.
okay.
So there are certain things that are just not quite lined up.
Yeah.
But again, still a good miniseries. So the Foundation, I'm going to call it the Foundation. It's the Hatfield and McCoy, but rather than repeat that every time, if I say the Foundation, that's what I'm referring to. They commented that both families had complex kinship and social networks. Again, I want to emphasize this point. The mythology is that these families were always isolated from each other, always separate, always competitive. That is not the case. Prior to the feud, it was friendly. And the website, this Foundation website, noted, quote, family loyalty was often determined not only by blood, but by employment and proximity. This McCoy descendant named Kimberly McCoy commented that families were really tight back then. You did take care of your family, but you also took care of your neighbors. It was pretty harmonious. You know, if you got married to a McCoy and you were a Hatfield, you started to feel more allegiance to McCoys. If you're working for Devil Ance and he's paying your bills, you're feeling some allegiance. So it was very, very intermingled, very intermixed. And then here's where it all started. Okay. There's even, some people do say, like you do, that it all started over the hog. But if you go to the Foundation website, and also several other sources agree with this, it seemed as though the beginnings actually occurred during the Civil War. Okay. So when the war broke out, and we all know this from history class, there was a lot of conflict. And sometimes that conflict actually occurred within families, brother versus brother.
Yeah.
This was true in this situation as well. Again, living in Virginia, Devil Ance, along with many of his relatives and neighbors, enlisted in the Confederate Army when the state decided to secede, and so they were firmly in that camp. Kentucky was neutral at first. It eventually went pro-Union, but there was a lot more division, I think.
Yeah.
In the McCoy clan, you had several McCoys, including Randall, who did decide they were going to fight for the Confederacy, but two of Randall's own brothers decided to fight for the Union.
Oh, okay.
So you had the split even within his own family. So because of the Tug Valley being situated where it was, you know, kind of on the border, the documentary commented that this area became something of a battleground. You know, people trying to get things across. You had...
But at this point, both of the patriarchs are on the same side.
They are.
They're on the same side, or they've
Yes,
chosen
they are.
that side. Okay.
That is absolutely true, yes.
All right.
But again, you have a lot of guerrilla fighting. There was a lot of violence just because of their location. And so the families that lived there were being terrorized a bit by what was happening, you know, just around them. So to protect his family from raids and violence, Devil Ance actually deserted the regular army, and he joined a local Confederate militia unit and kind of to still fight, but also to protect his family and his area. And this is where he, again, solidified and even bumped up that reputation for being fearless and fierce, okay? So now, in 1865, near the end of the war, Randall's brother, who was a Union sympathizer, his name was Asa Harmon McCoy. Sometimes I saw him referred to as Harmon, sometimes Asa. So I'm just going to call him Asa Harmon.
Sounds good.
He was found dead.
Oh.
And some McCoys strongly suspected that it was Devil Ance's military unit
That killed him.
They were the Logan Wildcats. Now, here's the thing. This incident, this murder, did not actually even lead to any reprisals. In fact, it was over 10 years before something else happened again, but this was listed in the timeline on the Foundation website as being the first incident.
It wasn't the inciting incident, but it was an incident.
Right. Some tension, some hard feelings are starting. On the flip side, some historians nowadays do see it differently. Even the Hatfield and McCoy Foundation acknowledged this. They said, quote, many people, even members of his own family, regarded Asa Harmon, who had served in the Union Army during the American Civil War as a traitor. While some have surmised that his murder set the stage for the feud, most historians now see this incident as a standalone event. Okay, so that's the first thing that happened. And now we come to the hog incident.
The hog/pig.
Yes. So there's more tension between the families over this, just going through the Civil War and this one incident. But this is where it really got heated. The pig incident occurred in 1878. Now, as we've already mentioned, Randall was not nearly as wealthy as Devil Anse. And for families who lived in this area, and especially families like the McCoys who weren't quite as wealthy, it was a big deal to have your hogs because you had a lot of mouths to feed.
Yeah.
And if you had this nice, big-sized hog, it could make for a lot of meals, especially during your winter months when it was harder to get food. So it's not, it kind of sounds funny. It's not funny. This was a valuable piece of property that was important to their family. Randall thought that Floyd Hatfield, who was a cousin of Devil Anse, was the one who had stolen his pig. And this was again in 1878. I heard different accounts of how it happened. One account said that he actually saw the pig, knew it was his, and saw that, it was on Floyd's property. I'm not sure exactly how he knew.
Okay.
But he was convinced Floyd had his hog. Randall took it to court, okay? Floyd Hatfield's trial took place in McCoy territory, but it was presided over by a cousin of Devil Anse. And I heard that he was nervous about it seeming partial or unfair, so he had 6 McCoys and 6 Hatfields in the jury, is what I heard.
Is a big enough family that they could do that?
Oh,
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely. The star witness was a man named Bill Staton. He was a McCoy relative who was married to a Hatfield.
Okay.
His testimony supported Floyd, the guy accused of stealing the pig. And then Floyd ended up being cleared of the charges.
So they're saying he didn't steal the pig. The pig's gone. We don't know where it is, but this guy didn't do it.
This guy didn't do it.
Okay.
He's free and they don't get their hog back,
Wherever she is.
Right, exactly. This obviously infuriated the McCoy family. And just as a little side note, if you go to Pike County, Kentucky, I noticed they have a replica of the little cabin where the famous hog trial was held.
Oh.
I have a picture of it in the show notes.
Cool.
Yeah. But again, Bill was the one who gave this testimony that basically turned the tide of the trial.
I feel like Bill's getting ready to be dispatched.
Well, you are you are right. But it took 2 years. 2 years later, in 1880, Bill got into a scuffle with 2 of Randall's nephews, Sam and Paris McCoy, and he ended up getting shot and killed by Sam McCoy. Sam did go to trial for murder, but was acquitted when it was ruled as self-defense.
Oh.
Okay, escalating, right?
Yeah, that's a big jump.
Yeah. The feelings are escalating, okay? And then, around the same time, is when we have the famous romance. Have you heard about the famous romance?
No.
Oh, well, we've got to add a little, romance and love in here.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. As we've said, animosity and the tension is increasing between these families. But then we had this little romance that started up, which is somewhat legendary. I think a lot of people have heard of this, okay? So the foundation says it was only a few months after Bill Staton's murder at a local Election Day gathering that took place in 1880 that 18-year-old, his name is Johnse. It looks like Johnse, but I heard it pronounced Johnse on the documentary, so I'm going to call him Johnse. So 18-year-old Johnse Hatfield, who was Devil Anse's son, met up with Roseanna McCoy, who was Randall's daughter.
Uh-oh.
And she's a few years older. She's about 21.
So we do have Romeo and Juliet in this episode.
Oh, kinda. Yes, we do. Okay, so the story goes that it was basically love at first sight.
How did they not see each other before this?
I mean, they're living across the river, from each other.
Yeah,
but,
they're young. Okay.
Yeah, and they're young, yes. But they were so taken with each other at this local Election Day event. Let me go ahead and explain this. Apparently, again, I think of Little House on the Prairie. You didn't have that many huge community gathering events. This was one of them.
Okay.
So when it happened, everybody comes. It is this huge social thing. They have food. They have activities. They have alcohol. People come there because they want to court or they want to meet somebody or they want to socialize. So apparently the two of them see each other there and they are like, woo, I'm drawn to you. And so they end up spending all this time together and pretty much basically right then decide we're going to start a romance. Okay. But presumably because of her family's disapproval, especially her dad, Randall's.
Yeah.
Roseanna, for a time, moves into the Hatfield house. Remember, this is Devil Ance's son, so we're talking Devil Ance's house.
Yeah.
And she's like living with the Hatfields
Ooh.
while they're dating, they're courting.
Yeah.
You might imagine this only made things worse.
Yeah.
Yes. And also, soon Roseanna became pregnant.
Oh.
Okay. Now, a lot of the rumors say that they did not get married because Devil Ance refused to let his son marry a McCoy. But based on what I saw, a lot of the historians now seem to feel that the blame falls more on Johnse. So apparently, he's 18 years old and he's also something of a ladies' man.
Stop.
Uh-huh. I
Ew.
know. So according to the foundation, he left his pregnant girlfriend,
Aw.
while another source said it was actually Roseanna who decided she wasn't going to put up with this. He
Yeah.
was going out with all these other ladies, and she left him, even though she loved him dearly. One way or the other,
Leaving was done.
yes, leaving happened. Some sources say that her dad would not take her back either. I do know that she ended up living with, I think it was her aunt for a time, or for maybe a long time. But again, there's a lot of tension, a lot of conflict around this. Any way you look at it, their relationship ended, and Johnse eventually married Roseanna's cousin Nancy,
Oh.
who most sources said was 15 years old. And by the time they married, I think he's a little older. So, I mean, it wasn't a big gap, but still.
Yeah.
And I should mention, Nancy is the daughter of Asa Harmon.
The one that died.
The one that was killed, the Union sympathizer who was the very first person killed. That's what happened with them. As for Roseanna, according to a Kentucky historical marker, her daughter, Sarah Elizabeth McCoy, who they nicknamed Sally, died as a baby. I think it was measles.
Oh.
And it is thought that Roseanna's heartbreak over losing both, Johnse
Yeah.
and then her daughter through death contributed to Roseanna's own early death in 1889.
That's sad.
It is very sad, which you can see why it's become legendary, because it is
Yeah.
tragic.
It's
It's a
tragic.
tragic love story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't we stop there and take a short break? And when we come back, we will talk about what everybody refers to as the big climactic event or the turning point of the feud.
Ooh.
Who knew that a story from the 1800s would have ties to a true crime event that happened in our own backyard in 2024? For our minisode this month, we have an unexpected current event related to this week's topic.
If you'd like to hear the absolutely riveting tale of how Fred and Sheila McCoy became modern-day bounty hunters, head on over to buymeacoffee.com/scandalwaterpod and become a member. As a supporter of Scandal Water, you'll have access to this and all our other minisodes. Cheers!
And we're back.
And if you guys haven't noticed, we have a little visitor in the studio. Scotty has been sleeping in my lap this whole time, so you might hear him snoring occasionally.
And he looks adorable, by the way. He is so cuddled up right
He
there in your
is.
arms.
He's swirled up like a little mouse.
Very content.
Yes.
So the event that the foundation calls the turning point of the feud occurred in 1882 on another election day. These really
Ooh.
were big events.
Yeah.
They were huge community gatherings. But anyway, on this particular election day in August of 1882, 3 of Randall's sons ended up getting into a fight with 2 of Devil Ance's brothers.
Okay. Sons versus brothers.
Yes. The fight escalated to the point that one of the McCoy brothers pulled out a knife and stabbed Ellison Hatfield several times and then shot him in the back.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
That's not really self-defense there, guys.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
That's full-on murder.
Yes, absolutely. The McCoy boys were apprehended by the law, but according to the foundation, quote, the Hatfields interceded, spiriting the men to Hatfield territory. So I wondered, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah.
Okay, based on what I could find, here's what seemed to have occurred. So again, the law went out and rounded up these McCoy brothers, and they actually had them in custody. They're taking them toward the jail when Devil Ance shows up with a whole posse, probably mostly Hatfields, but it could have been some Hatfield sympathizers or family, friends, whatever. And they take those brothers away, and basically now they're in Hatfield custody, and they take them to some remote spot on the Hatfield land.
Ugh.
Now, rumor has it that Devil Anse pretty much said openly, I'm going to wait and see what happens with my brother Ellison to decide what we're doing with these boys.
Oh, dang.
Yeah. So basically, the Hatfields are holding these McCoy brothers captive, waiting to hear what has happened with Devil Anse's brother.
Okay.
And when they learned that he died, they took those 3 McCoy brothers, these are Randall's sons, Randall's kids, and they tied them to some pawpaw bushes and fired more than 50 shots, killing all 3 of them. This is brutal. We are now in brutal territory,
Yes.
this whole incident. So indictments were issued against something like 20 men that they thought were involved in this, Hatfields or Hatfield friends. This definitely included Devil Anse and his sons, but they were never arrested. They just went about their lives for about 5 years.
5 years?
Uh-huh. And as you might imagine, the McCoys are furious,
Yeah.
like they are beyond. But according to one Kentucky Life episode, rather than come after the Hatfields himself, Randall kept attempting to go through legal channels to seek justice.
Okay, he's trying to do it the right way.
Exactly. And that was a point, because remember, we'll come back to this again, probably a few different times, but we have that whole stereotype of the hillbillies being violent and brutal and showing no progressive thinking. They're trying to do things legally several times, like with the hog trial.
Yeah.
They tried to use legal means, but in this case, it was failing him. And this is where a man named Perry Cline comes into the picture, who in the Hatfield and McCoy story also has a big reputation.
Okay.
Perry Cline was an attorney married to Martha McCoy, the widow of Randall's brother, Asa Harmon.
Okay, he's back.
We keep coming around.
We keep doing.
So Perry Cline also happened to have a bitter hatred for Devil Anse because years earlier, Perry had lost a lawsuit against Devil Anse over a deed for thousands of acres of land. So many historians suspect that Perry Cline had a bit of a vendetta against Devil Anse, that he was looking for revenge. And as the foundation put it, quote, using his political connections, Cline had the charges against the Hatfields reinstated. He also convinced the governor to put out rewards for their arrest.
Oh,
Okay, now
they got a price on their heads.
exactly. And talk about escalating things. We're going to take a little side detour for just a second, though, because it's around this time that the media gets hold of the story. A reporter named T.C. Crawford came out to interview Devil Anse. And when T.C. Crawford's stories came out, it was beyond sensational. Here is a short clip from that American Experience documentary talking about this.
The story he ends up telling is as much fancy as it is fact. And that's not necessarily because he was a bad reporter. T.C. Crawford is typical of a journalist working in what's going to very soon be called yellow journalism. The important thing wasn't so much to get the facts right as it was to tell an elaborate, entertaining story.
The first of 3 articles appeared on Sunday, October 7th, 1888. I have been away in Murderland for nearly 10 days, Crawford wrote. No one would believe that there is in this country such a barbarous, uncivilized, and wholly savage region. The series continued for 3 consecutive Sundays, reaching hundreds of thousands of readers. The Cincinnati Enquirer picked it up and took the story national, calling Hatfield the outlaw king and giving him equal billing with Jack the Ripper.
What?
The Hatfield-McCoy feud was a media sensation. Every day people would pick up the newspaper wanting to read about what was going on in this little part of America.
Isn't this interesting?
Equal with Jack the Ripper.
I know. And I thought it was so fascinating what he said about it at that time period. It wasn't like he's criticizing the reporter. He's saying this is how it was handled at that time.
Yeah.
It was about the story and the sensationalism.
Not the truth.
Not the truth. And so I started to see, well, this is where you get some of these stereotypes.
Yep.
This is where the story came out in a way that was not representative of the full truth.
Right.
This is what the foundation said about the media coverage. Quote, in their accounts, the Hatfields were often portrayed as violent backwoods hillbillies who roamed the mountains stirring up violence. The sensationalist coverage planted the seed for the rivalry to become cemented in the American imagination. What had been a local story was becoming a national legend.
Ooh.
Yeah. Whether or not the Hatfields were aware of all the attention that they were getting up north, because this is all happening, I believe, in New York City, if I recall correctly. Remember, they've given him the nickname the Outlaw King. I doubt that he Kentucky even knows this, but they are definitely aware of all the attention they are getting locally because of this bounty placed on their heads.
Yeah.
This is really stirring things up. And according to a few different sources, this is actually what led to probably, I think, the most violent and brutal and uncalled for act that occurred.
Okay.
Here's how it went down according to the foundation website. In an effort to end the commotion once and for all, a group of the Hatfields and their supporters hatched a plan to attack Randolph McCoy and his family. Led by Devil Ance's son Cap and ally Jim Vance, a group of Hatfield men ambushed the McCoys' home on New Year's Day in 1888. Randolph fled, escaping into the woods. His son Calvin and daughter Alifair were killed in the crossfire. His wife, Sarah, was left badly beaten by the Hatfields, suffering a crushed skull.
Oh, gosh.
So his innocent family members are attacked in their home. I'm like, I mean, some of these other things that happen in the midst of a fight, that's bad enough.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh my gosh.
You went into their home.
Yeah, and most reports, the foundation didn't mention this, but other reports, other sources mentioned that their house was also burned to the ground, that they basically kind of burned them out.
Oh.
It wasn't in the Hatfield and McCoy Foundation's version, but that's something I did see other places. So basically at this point, between the 3 McCoy sons who were tied to the pawpaw bushes and shot, and now these 2 children, Randall has lost 5 of his kids.
Gosh.
Yeah, and his wife very seriously injured. She survives.
She did?
Yeah, she survived.
Wow.
Now, just as a side note, me reading that, I was wondering how would the Hatfields have thought that ambushing Randall's family in this way could have done them any good? How could they think that this would put a stop to the commotion? But then I saw a note in a biography article that made sense to me. What they pointed out was, this is their speculation, they're thinking that the Hatfields figured that if you wipe out the key McCoy family members, then the whole murder case would fall apart. Because remember, it's really Randall who's pushing the whole...
So they're thinking if we kill Randall, it'll get dropped?
Basically, yes. They're thinking it'll get dropped, the bounty hunters won't be chasing us anymore because the case will be gone. It sounded as though there might have even been some Hatfields who had been caught at this point, so like this would prevent them from going to trial. Randall's not going to be there to testify if he's dead. That's the speculation as to how they thought this would end things, put an end to it. Okay? But if that was their plan, it failed miserably.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
You can't take the leader and try to kill his whole family and then not want to give retribution.
Right.
That's not how that works.
Right. Because, I mean, I assume their main goal was to take him out, and they did not take him out.
They did not take him out.
Right. So this incident would come to be known as the New Year's Massacre. And a few days after it occurred, a fierce bounty hunter named Frank Phillips came in, and he began to lead some raids coming after the Hatfields. He managed to track down Jim Vance and Cap Hatfield, killing Jim Vance. And then he led the McCoy side, because he had them helping, a group of them helping, in this skirmish with the Hatfields that occurred on January 19th, 1888, and would come to be known as the Battle of Grapevine Creek. There were injuries and casualties, and Frank ended up capturing more Hatfield family members and supporters. So ultimately, there were 9 they had captured that were set to go to trial.
Okay.
So the case spent some time bogged down in legalities, the main question being whether these West Virginia men could be charged because they had been illegally extradited across state lines.
Oh,
okay?
Yeah.
So it had to go all the way to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court ruled in 1888 that the Hatfields, who were being held in custody, could be tried. Okay. On the Foundation website, it says, the trial began in 1889, and in the end, 8 of the Hatfields and their supporters were sentenced to life in prison. Ellison Mounts, who was believed to be the son of Ellison Hatfield, he's the one who was murdered by those 3 boys, was sentenced to death. Nicknamed Cotton Top, he was known to be mentally challenged, and many viewed him as a scapegoat, even though he had confessed his guilt. Although public executions were against the law in Kentucky, thousands of spectators gathered to witness the hanging of Ellison Mounts on February 18th, 1890. Reports claim that his last words were, "They made me do it. The Hatfields made me do it." Now, I wanted to know more.
Yeah.
On a Kentucky historical marker, it talked about Cotton Top, I'm going to use his nickname,
Okay.
and his execution. Here's what is on a Kentucky historical marker. Ellison Mounts, a poor 25-year-old who took part in the raid of the McCoys' home in 1888, was found guilty of the murder of Alifair McCoy. That's one of the children. Okay. Mounts pled guilty, believing at worst he would be sentenced to life in prison, according to some Feud historians. Nonetheless, Perry Klein, who had served as defense attorney to the other Hatfield descendants, did not defend Mounts in the trial and persuaded Mounts to give his jailhouse confession in front of the press. The jury quickly found Mounts guilty and sentenced him to death by hanging. Mounts immediately attempted to change his plea to not guilty and requested a new trial. The request was denied.
Yeah, that does sound like a scapegoat to me.
Yeah. That historical marker goes on to offer more information. One of those things being speculation that he, again, was a scapegoat. It
Yeah.
also comments that that huge crowd of spectators who showed up to see the hanging, probably a large number of them, were actually there expecting to see the Hatfields ride in and
save him,
stop it.
and they didn't.
And they did not. In fact, they think Cotton Top was probably expecting the same thing himself.
Poor bud.
Yeah. So this is what basically ended the feud.
Really?
This is like the last event that they list in the timeline, because I think in some ways justice was done, right? There was a trial, there was sentencing, there was an execution. Randall would go on to become a ferry operator, and he died in 1914 at the age of 88 from burns he suffered in an accidental fire. They said that he really struggled with the loss of his children, for his whole life. Devil Anse Hatfield, who had always seemed very anti-religion, actually was born again later in life and was baptized when he was 73. And I heard this was just some fella who was talking about his own personal experiences. His dad had known the Hatfields and the McCoys, and anyway, he said Devil Anse was a very different person after he found religion.
He would have to be.
Yeah, but that's basically how it ended, or you would think.
Okay.
You would think.
Okay.
Except for something exciting that happened over 100 years later.
What?
Do you know what I'm going to say?
No, what?
Okay.
What? You're so excited.
I
What?
am. I'm so excited. What you are about to hear is a clip from a broadcast of the Saturday Early Show that aired on June 14th of 2003, where the Hatfields and McCoys officially signed a truce.
Oh my goodness.
The family's always been very prideful and proud of their history. In 2000, we had our initial reunion on a national level. We had Hatfields and McCoys from all over the country come together, and it's been a great time, 4 years running. We're very proud of both families.
Rio, as I understand it, the truce was your idea, so give us a small portion of it, what it says there on the parchment.
The last paragraph, which is we think is important, it says, "We ask by God's grace and love that we be forever remembered as those that bound together the hearts of two families to form a family of freedom in America." And we're all going to sign that.
Go right ahead, and as you do sign it, I might continue to ask you some questions here. And the anger ran really deep here on both sides, as I understand it. I mean, there were murders, there were public executions. This went all the way up to the Supreme Court at one point. Even today, now government's getting involved. The governors are recognizing this day, aren't they?
Yes, they are. They signed proclamations. And they're behind us, actually, as we speak.
How much?
Does that not make you so happy?
Why did I get like teary-eyed when he was reading the last paragraph of that? Like, whoo.
You know, they take it very seriously, and they even go on to say, you know what, if our families can put aside all these decades of bitter feelings against each other, we hope we can be a role model for other groups and other people are having the same kind of animosity.
That's really beautiful.
I know. I loved it. So,
unexpectedly beautiful.
I'm telling you, I did not realize going into this episode how much I was going to love it.
Yes.
But I did. I truly love this story. So one last comment before we go into our armchair. There are all kinds of museums and tours and things that have developed in honor of this story of these families. So there's not only the Hatfield and McCoy Foundation website that I've talked about, but there are museums you can go to. You can take a little tour of the territory. You can go see some artifacts. So if you want to check that out, I believe you would go to Pike County in Kentucky or Logan County in West Virginia, and you could see some of those for yourself.
That is fascinating.
Armchair Psychologist.
I'm going to take our armchair in a totally different direction.
Please do. Let's
so
hear it.
if you have any other thoughts you would like to just offer in general before...
No, let me hear
okay.
it. What you got?
So I told you, as I was going through this, there were so many things that took me by surprise, such as those comments about the stereotype of, of hillbillies and Kentuckians, and also some of that information about the media coverage. I'm going to play for you one more clip that's going to present some ideas that I found fascinating, and I'm going to ask you to respond.
It was a disaster for mountain people to be turned into this kind of lurid, violent literature in which there was no social content whatsoever or attention paid to their motives. They became two-dimensional and entirely the victims of the journalists and the perceptions of the readers, which was that these people were savages, that they were living in the past, backward, incapable of historical progress.
It's a sort of propaganda in a way. It's a justification for what's about to happen because of capitalists who are making their way into the interior of eastern Kentucky and southern West Virginia. It's not necessarily a conspiracy between the newspapers and the railroads and the coal companies, but there is a symbiotic relationship between the press and big business. And the story that people like Crawford are trying to tell is that these are people who need to be fixed.
This country is wonderfully rich, Crawford proclaimed to the world, and needs only a railroad to come up through it to drive out this outlaw class.
Some interesting new points in that. And again, this is somebody's opinion. I mean, I don't want to present it as factual, but I thought it was interesting, that point that it wasn't maybe just about a good story. At that time, it may not have even been intentional, but the whole country was looking toward industrialization and progress and technology. And in a way, even if it wasn't a conscious decision, was there a little bit of, hey, if we portray it this way, it's easier to think about pushing these people out of their land?
Yeah, that's a really good point. That wasn't even occurring to me when I was listening to that. More of what I was thinking of is how they were portraying them as savages, just for the reputation and the sensationalism of it. And then I was reflecting on, I am proud to be from Kentucky. I like being from here. I like being from the country. I like living in the country. I like being in a small town. I told you before we started that I started watching the Netflix special, The Perfect Couple, and I've only seen the first episode, so I don't know how it turns out. I just have heard it's good, but my first thought after finishing was, gosh, I'm glad I'm not those people. I really, and I mean it sincerely, like nothing against them, not mocking them or anything, but what a stressful, horrible life that must be of the rich and famous. And this is a totally separate subject, but just thinking of, like, I like who I am. I like the Kentucky way of life. I like that most of us are just regular people, blue collar people. Those are my people, and I like them, and I'm proud of them.
Yeah, I'm proud to be a Kentuckian too. And I've already said this at the beginning of the episode, but I lived in Indiana for 10 years. I'm proud to be from Indiana as well.
A part-time Indiana person.
That's right. It's just a beautiful area with lots of great people. You always hear about how friendly we are. Like people who visit this area will always talk about how friendly we are. And I think that's true. I just found it interesting because knowing what was coming, I did think about the portrayal of them because it made a good story. And also, I don't think it was necessarily intentional. I don't think anybody said, hey, let's portray them this way and then it'll make it easier for these things to happen. I think it was that was the mindset of the time.
Right.
We're about progress. We're about technology. But it was also sad to think that basically it was these people who had lived in this area for years upon years upon years who were seeing their way of life being taken from them and were kind of, I think, being judged in a way because they enjoyed a simple life and it wasn't what was coming. Like what was coming was the urban lifestyle.
Right.
What was popular was the progress. And
yeah, but that didn't cause them to kill each other.
No.
Progress didn't cause them to kill each other, but it made it, I think they capitalized on it and made it even more sensational. And like, why did we have to make them savages? Because they were behaving in a uncouth way, in a murderous way. But why is that where the bare feet started? All of that stuff.
Okay, you have 2 points that I really want to address. So
Sorry.
First, I'm going to say no. I think your point is well taken. I mean, I personally think they did some really awful things. There were some actions they took that I personally think were just terrible. On the flip side, this is something that one of the sources pointed out. They said at this time in history, there were a lot of brutal things happening. There were people who were taking land, who were westward expansion. Like, you could go through and you could see a lot of examples of people who were getting into fights and murder was happening or brutal things were happening. But a lot of those other incidents were maybe more glorified or accepted because they involved different people or different situations. It seemed like there was more judgment or more of an angle placed on these particular families. That was kind of a point that it was just one source that made that point, but it made me think. As for the bare feet, I think that was maybe, this is me speculating, this is my speculation, but I think that was maybe T.C. Crawford, who was one of the first journalists to ever actually visit the area. He may have been the first, and to talk with devil ants and to see this family in their natural setting. And I suspect he was playing things up. I mean, these were mountain people.
So they may not have been wearing shoes.
They may not have been. They did have long beards, and they, some of their lifestyle habits were simpler than T.C. Crawford's. He came from New York, and he was in a fancy little area. So I suspect he just exaggerated or almost made, in fact, I like how the PBS documentary said it. It became a thing of two dimensions. They made these people two-dimensional. Yeah. They were almost caricatures rather than actual flesh and blood, three-dimensional people with complex motivations and strong feelings and just so much going on.
Which takes us all the way back to the beginning with the Bugs Bunny cartoon, where they had on the hayseed and the bare feet and the ultimate cartoon. They are cartoons now.
Yes, and I don't want to be judgy, but even in the Saturday early show interview, the fella who was talking to I don't think I told you this, but it was a panel of 3 different people. There was one fella who was a Hatfield and then 2 McCoys who were there at the table. And
I wondered why there was 3.
Yeah, they headed up this initiative to sign the truce, and they've actually done a lot of other events since then. So they're kind of, or at least they used to be 20 years ago, leaders in this. All that to say, when this interviewer was talking to them, I cut this out, but he kept making jokes about, did you all have to check your guns at the door? And,
why would you do that?
Well, he was being funny. He was playing, but that's exactly what he was doing. It was funny to play into the stereotype. Yeah. And he was doing this even at this point in time, which was a little over 20 years ago.
Right. And the 3 men in suits are looking at him like, really, guy?
Yeah.
Really?
Well, they laughed and went along with him, but I think it just says it's so accepted. It's supposed to be funny, but what are the elements of it that, aren't funny? Yeah. Well, I had a lot of fun with that episode.
That was a really, especially if Devil really had a moment of redemption. That's really beautiful. And then maybe that planted the seeds for the family truce and the forgiveness. My goodness, like they said, if we can get past all of this, they have got a lot to be angry about. And if they can put it aside and forgive each other and love each other and have this truce, that was beautiful. That is beautiful.
Yeah, that really is an example that I would love to follow.
Me too.
I would like to see more of in our society.
Me too.
So let's end with a big cheers to the Hatfields and McCoys.
Yeah.
Thank you for setting the example and putting aside years of bitterness and anger and showing us what it can look like.
Absolutely. Cheers.
Cheers. If you love what we do, please rate and review our show. Or you can become a supporter by making a donation through buymeacoffee.com/scandalwaterpod. Whether a single gift or a recurring monthly donation, it would go a long way towards supporting our work and allowing us to keep the tea brewing.
At our website, www.scandalwaterpodcast.com, you can submit questions or your own story ideas, access our sources and show notes, see the merch we offer for sale, and more. You can join the Scandal Water community through our Scandal Water Podcast Facebook page or follow us on Instagram or TikTok at Scandal Water Podcast.
This episode was executive produced by Candy Thomas, that's me, and Ashley Raymer Brown,
that's me.
It was researched and written by Candy Thomas and edited by Ashley Raymer Brown.
A special thank you to Josh Martin, who wrote, composed, and performed the Scandal Water theme and other music. Matt C. Adams, who created the artwork, and Joshua Reith, who designed our website and provides ongoing technical support.
As a reminder, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes. The thoughts and opinions of the host during each episode of Scandal Water are their own and do not reflect the opinions of any future guests, advertisers, or clearly professional psychologists. Thanks for listening.